All right, y'all, what is happening? T.C.B, the country boy, coming back at you from Big D. What is going on, everybody? Nice to see y'all. I got my British hat on. All right, so I'm gonna do a little something on the Beatles. I'm gonna do something really cool too, and something that I have kind of hypothesized, as they say, just based on the information that I got. The question is about Pete Best. Here's the question, very simple. Was Pete Best kicked out of the band because he was a crappy drummer? Or was there something else? Well, I wouldn't be mentioning this thing if he was just a crappy drummer. So I'm going to say there was something else. And a lot of people have kind of beat around it or whatever. But no, man, I tell you what, there was a whole lot going on. And it was not cool. So I want y'all to sit back and check this out. I kind of put together this compilation of information about Pete Best and the Beatles from back in the day. And this is what got me to that conclusion that I'm going to give y'all in the very end. So here we go. Check it out. What is Pete Best like? What kind of personality do people say that Pete is? Well, check this out.
Mean, moody, and magnificent. Pete Best.
Pete Best was singled out for his mean, moody magnificence.
Now, when it comes to Pete Best and being in the band, is there any information out there that shows that Pete Best maybe is not a team player? Or is there any negative thing about Pete Best that would make it seem like he's different than the other bandmates? Take a look at this.
Stu had Astrid cut his hair in the Exie style that was popular with the local art school students. During a visit to Liverpool, she styled George's hair the same way. Jurgen styled Paul and John's hair during a visit they made to see him in Paris. And with that, the Beatles' haircut was born. As for Pete, he kept his rocker look.
While we were out there, we started to see other groups and stuff and started to get a little bit dissatisfied with Pete. Not massively, but just a little bit of dissatisfaction started to creep in. He got to know this stripper, and he and she were like boyfriend and girlfriend. Of course, she didn't finish work till about 4 in the morning, and he'd stay up till she finished work, and then he'd start his evening. So he'd roll back to us at about 10 in the morning or something, and he'd be going to bed when we'd be getting up. So I think that had something to do with a little bit of a sort of rift creeping in.
Lovely man, but he just was not, didn't have the same humour as the other three, or the same way of life.
You can't change your personality. Pete's very quiet. I liked Pete, but
it was different, and that probably didn't work too well when you're away a long time together and stuck together.
We'd drive back from Newcastle and he'd go home, but we'd still go finish the night off somewhere.
the other three were so outgoing, and I think they needed somebody outgoing.
Wow, okay. When they come back from Hamburg, Germany, how good are they as a band? How good is Pete Best as a drummer? Take a look at this. Check this out.
The Beatles played 7-hour sets 7 days a week. Paul McCartney told Pete Best to crank up the beat, so Best went atomic and developed the atom beat. After 4 months in Germany, the Beatles returned to England to play the Casbah Coffee Club and show off their new sound. Powered by Pete Best on drums, these weren't the same old Quarrymen. Fans were stunned at the improvement.
Playing in Germany had made them into such a tight group and everything like that. Every member of the group would have been tight. So they all came, all four of them back, leaving Stuart behind, but all four came back as exceptional.
When they came back from Hamburg, they were red hot. I mean, nobody could touch them.
Word spread, and they were offered a permanent residence at the Cavern Club in downtown Liverpool.
Pete playing the bass drum was really loud. I mean, it was straight, boom, boom, straight forwards all the time on the bass drum.
At the time, the Beatles sound was Pete Best's bass drum. All the drummers were copying him.
And he played drums plenty well enough for the Beatles at that time, you know.
He was a very impressive drummer.
if you listen to his early drumming or hear any of his stuff, it was just as adequate a drummer as Ringo.
Okay, so it looks like from what some people are saying, I don't hear anything where Pete Best is a terrible drummer. Matter of fact, he had previously invented some kind of thing or something. I don't know what that's about, but that would mean that he obviously, if he invented something when it comes to drumming, some sort of a thing, obviously he's doing something a little bit different. Maybe, I don't know. That would be meaning that he's a good drummer. But anyway, let's go forward and find out when it comes to any other outside influences. For example, the information that I got when it comes to Pete Best's mom. You know, was she involved in the band at all? Was she involved in anything? Obviously, she, had the house where they started, where they had this little social club where Pete was playing, here and there and here and there before they actually went to Hamburg and got tight as far as a band goes. Well, how was she involved in that? Well,
first I ever heard about the Beatles was when Pete Best's mother rang me up and said, you should know about this group called the Beatles. They're very good, they played for me, they're very good indeed.
All right, so while they're in Liverpool playing, is there anything distinctive about any surroundings or what's noticeably different? Well, I tell you what, I didn't realize this, but I want you to listen to these clips. This basically talks about Pete Best in relation to the band and how the public saw Pete versus or as together with the band. Was there any kind of rift there or any potential rift there at all? Take a look at these.
And whenever the Beatles used to appear, all the girls used to shout and scream for Pete.
As Best's popularity soared, Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison were sometimes ignored. Jealousy began creeping into the act.
He was one of the stars of the band because, let's face it, all the chicks loved Pete,
Pete was the most popular member of the band with the girls. I remember at the Cavern they used to tell, Lennon and McCartney and Harrison to sit down so they could see Pete when he was doing Matchbox. And they had to, they sat, I remember them sitting on the floor, on the front of the Cavern playing away, and Pete was singing and the girls were all screaming. And, and I can only presume, because it was never ever said, that the other three were, very jealous of Pete from that point of view.
Many fans began referring to the group as Pete Best and the Beatles. Best was given a solo spot during every performance, and at one point, Pete and his drum kit were placed in the front of the stage, with Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison forced to perform from the back. That summer, an article in the Mersey Beat raved about the musically authoritative and physically magnetic Beatles. Pete Best was singled out for his mean, moody magnificence. John, Paul, and George were never mentioned.
We found out afterwards jealousy was creeping into the act.
That's definitely disturbing. I tell you what, as a bandmate, as a drummer, and as a dude that don't write and sing the songs, wow. I wouldn't say jealousy is a thing, although, Pete Best may have been a better looking dude or whatever. Maybe the chicks did like him more or whatever. But wow, that was definitely not cool. Okay, as this kept going on and Pete Best was known as the Pete Best and Beatles separately, as if Pete Best was the man, and he allowing it to happen and his mom possibly even pushing that forward. I think that final deal right before they got signed that was in the newspaper, I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
We were delighted because we knew that we had a recording contract. We'd been told we were signed, sealed and delivered.
I was looking for something original because I didn't want to do one of the oldies, and Love Me Do was the best song that I could find from them at that time.
George Martin said the main reason he signed the Beatles was Brian Epstein's unwavering belief that they were going to be famous. An excited Epstein telegrammed the Mersey Beat with news of the band's record deal. When the Mersey Beat announced the story on its front page, the only Beatle shown was Pete. George decided Pete had to go. Soon Paul was in agreement. But to make it happen, they would need to convince John Lennon.
I want you to check this out.
And then we had all sorts of different drummers all the time. People who owned drum kits were far and few between. It was an expensive item. And they were usually idiots, you know. We got Pete Best just because we needed a drummer the next day to go to Hamburg. By then we were pretty sick of Pete Best too, because he was a lousy drummer, you know. He never improved, you know. And there was always this myth being built up over the years that he was great and Paul was jealous of him because he was pretty and all that crap, you know. And the reason he got in the group in the first place was because the only way we could get to Hamburg, we had to have a drummer. And we just heard that this guy was, we knew of this guy who was living at his mother's house who had a club in it, and he had a drum kit, and we just grabbed him, auditioned him, and he could keep one beat going for long enough, so we took him to Germany. And we were always going to dump him when we could find a decent drummer, you know. But by the time we'd got brought back from Germany, we'd trained him to keep a stick going up and down and four in the bar. He couldn't do much else, you know. And he looked nice, and the girls liked him, so, you know, that was all right.
How would you feel if you was Paul McCartney, John Lennon, and George Harrison? And the dude that's the drummer, who was brought on, from what I gather, the way they had it, or the way John Lennon put it, was, man, we needed a trained monkey that could just keep a beat, you know? And that being said, now let's listen to what Paul McCartney has to say about Pete Best and him not being in the band.
Was he thrown out of the band because he was so good looking?
No.
It was his drummer.
You know what? The truth was, we just kind of fell in love with Ringo's drumming.
Right.
Ringo was in another band, and we had Pete, and we were working, and we used to go see this other band. We said, God, that drummer's good.
Right.
And one night, Pete couldn't do it, and Ringo sat in for him, and we all just went, It was like, oh my God, what is
What do we do
happening?
now?
There was something funny going on.
Yeah.
Behind us was this powerhouse, and this person who was like taking care of the job, and we went, oh dear. And then what happened was we really started to think we needed the great drummer in Liverpool. And the great drummer in our eyes was this guy called Ringo Starr.
All right. So, after listening to this, I think maybe he's taking the high road. You know what? And he's basically saying, look, the reason why we got rid of Pete Best was because, we kept seeing this dude in this other band named Ringo, who was just awesome. And that one time that he played with us because Pete Best was sick, then you know what? That's when we knew we needed this drummer. Well, all right, now listen to George. This is what George has to say.
Pete kept being sick and not showing up for the gig.
I am sure that the manager knew the feelings of Paul and George and John Lennon when it came to Pete Best. And I'm sure he could see at all these events that he was managing, that Pete Best was the man. And Pete Best, it was Pete Best and the Beatles. Well, I'm sure he knew that something was going on. He knew. There's just no two ways about it. He saw him at the club. He saw how the reaction was. But you know what? When it comes to Pete Best's mom, I think Pete Best's mom was in charge of Pete Best fan club. So wow. I mean, Pete Best had a large following. And you know what? I think a lot of that had to do with Pete Best's mother. Pete Best's mother was the mother hen. And she was in charge of a lot of stuff. Or she made herself in charge of a lot of stuff. And I think, to be honest with you, there was a lot of animosity there. I want to show you this clip of what the manager thought about Pete Best's mom. And how important I think this particular part is as well to this whole deal.
We had a lot of trouble with Pete's mother, Mona Best.
She was constantly ringing up Brian Epstein and saying, what are you going to do for Pete's band? And Brian Epstein didn't like that at all.
Brian phoned me and said, I'm going to have to let the band go. He said, maybe you'd be interested. I said, why? He said, I can't get over Mrs. Best. He said, she's just, overpowering. So we discussed that it might be better to get rid of Mrs. Best by getting rid of Pete.
Wow. okay, either he or his mother screwed this deal up royally. And yeah, you know what? I want y'all to listen to this clip. And this is Pete Best talking about the day that he was canned and the day that he was fired from the Beatles, and how it was such a major surprise to him. And he didn't see it coming. Well,
we played the Cavern, gone down fantastically as we normally did. And at the end of the night, I got a message from Brian, which basically turned around and said, "Pete, I'd like to see you in the office in the morning." I walked into Brian's office, and I could tell that Brian wasn't a normal, cool, calm, placid Brian, to be quite honest. He was quite agitated. He was fidgety. Talked around the subject for a while, and then he just basically turned around and said, "Pete," he said, "I really don't know how to turn around and tell you this." He said, "But I will." And he said, "In short, the boys want you out. And it's already been arranged that Ringo will join the band on Saturday." And that was the bombshell.
Wow. Okay. Here's the deal. Do I think Pete Best was kicked out of the band because he was a crappy drummer? I'm going to say not no, but I'm going to say hell no. I think that Paul McCartney and the guys that claim that were just being nice. They were just taking the high road. Because number one, they wasn't going to say and diss Pete's mom and say that kind of stuff. They weren't going to say that Pete was very disrespectful in how the band was done and how his mom took it over and all that other stuff. And that this is not Pete Best's band and Pete Best and the Beatles. Well, I think they got their final straw and they looked for a way out. So I think Pete Best pretty much did this to himself. And I think Pete Best's mother did this to her son. You know what? You've got to give respect where respect is due. And to even have an inkling of the fact that Pete Best would be the main guy in the Beatles when John and Paul were writing and singing all the songs. You know, I can see exactly why they did what they did. And they didn't want to confront his mother, because when you confront Pete, you're going to confront his mom. And unfortunately, like I said, he did it to himself. He could have, would have, should have, man. That's all I got to say. In conclusion, you know what? Pete, I'm sorry, bro. But you can't sit there and step on people that are punching your ticket. You know, I can understand when you're riding the coattails of somebody, you need to get in the back and ride the coattails. You cannot step up front and try to take credit for steering the ship when you just holding on for a free ride. So, and that's just something I just think that you either allowed it to happen, and because of the fact that you were getting chicks and you were the man, so to speak, in front of everybody else, well, maybe that was cool at your house. And maybe that was cool when y'all first started, but you didn't really even get into it then. When y'all came back and your mom got you that gig at the Cavern Club, you shouldn't have done that, man. You was just asking for trouble. All right, y'all. I'll see y'all later. Cheers to my people on the other side of the pond. I will be there very soon again for the third time. All right. I'll see y'all later. I want you to check this out.
I've always said Ringo was a very lucky person. And I was sitting here in this room one night with Paul McCartney, and I said, "There's one lucky person, isn't there, Paul?" And he said, "Don't go down there, Joe." He said, "Leave him alone."
All right, y'all. T.C.B, the country boy, coming back at you from Big D. What's happening, everybody? I just want to let y'all know that if y'all do know of somebody that's got a house that needs some work and they want to get rid of it, they don't want to mess with it anymore, let us know. Let us know who those people are. Get us in contact with them. If we buy the house, I'll give you $1,000, man. Simple as that. Just for the hookup of knowing somebody that's got a house that they want to get rid of, man. anywhere in the United States, as long as it's a decent, livable neighborhood, and we don't get killed going over there trying to fix it up or whatever. But I'm just saying, you know what I'm saying? So we can do some business and some fun at the same time. So there you go, y'all. I appreciate it.